Hello, friends. Robert Bevan here, author of the Caverns and Creatures series of comedy, fantasy novels, and short stories. With me is Sam West, and it is another Martial Monday, and we are going to discuss the fighting style dueling.
But also sword and board, and also any other kind of dueling you want to do. I don't know. Maybe pull up a flintlock pistol in
Yes.
Alexander Hamilton or something. I don't know. This is a really simple fighting style. All three of the marshals get it. So by marshals, I mean people that get fighting styles. So it's fighter, ranger, paladin, all have access to this. Like all the fighting styles, it's pretty short. When you're wielding a weapon, a melee weapon in one hand.
Melee weapon, not pistols.
Melee weapon, no pistols.
Unfortunate.
Yeah, it'd be cool. In any case, when you're wielding a
A
melee weapon
hand
in one hand,
crossbow. That would be awesome.
it would. I agree. Listen, while you're wielding a melee weapon, though, in one hand and other weapons, you get a +2 to damage rolls with the weapon. So if it's a long sword and shield, you do +2 damage on the long sword. If it is, it has to be one hand. It can't be two-handed. So this doesn't work if you're holding a great sword. But if you're holding a great sword with one hand, somehow that will get the +2 bonus then, because it doesn't say a non-two-handed weapon. It just says a weapon in one hand. So this works with rapiers, and if you're doing the duelist fantasy, but that's strictly worse than using a sword and board most of the time. Usually you want to have a shield, and all three classes get access to shields, so like shields are pretty free. This basically is the damage option for the protector frontline classic look of the paladin, classic look of the sword and board fighter, where you got big old kite shield in one hand, long sword in the other that you sheath, and you point it up in the air victoriously, and you put light on it, and you stab things in the darkness. It's very iconic. You'll hit a little bit harder when you do it.
And yeah, that's you get +2 bonus damage.
Yep.
I don't know, you hit a little bit harder, but I think especially for like a fighter, when you get a bunch of attacks, then those 2 points are going to add up.
Yeah, fighters get a lot more attacks. I've recently done the deep dive on Ranger, and I'm going through every single one of the Ranger subclasses, and I've found that there was more than I remembered access for Rangers making more attacks. There are a lot of ways where you get 3 or 4 attacks as Ranger. Sometimes it's with a pet, but a lot of times with like Whirlwind Strike or something, and getting an extra 2 damage to all those seems pretty cool. So there are going to be some windows where making lots of attacks is ability you can go with. Making a bunch of attacks with a one-handed weapon is normally worse than making a bunch of attacks with a ranged weapon or a two-handed weapon, mainly because of the feat options that you have at your disposal, right? You don't get Sharpshooter, you don't get Great Weapon Master, which are the 2 huge damage-dealing feats. You're trading that off for a +2 damage here, which is fine still. My end-up core issue with it is this competes in the sword and board slot for interception and protection. I love dearly both of those fighting styles. I acknowledge they're not always that great, but there will be a lot of tables where they're very useful. And if you're playing the character dedicated to that wants to be wielding a shield and a one-handed weapon, which is most often the time what the characters taking dueling do, it feels to me like you want to be more of the bulwark of protection. It feels to me like you want to bring some support while also making your 3 attacks a turn. And that's where I would want my fighting style to sort of highlight that. If that's not your thing, though, and you want to be a sword and board paladin, but you want to be, still an attacking badass that stabs things really well, then dueling, I think, is more what you're going for.
Yeah, that's kind of what I would want to do.
Fair.
Sorry, I'm not familiar with the term sword and board. The board in this case is the
Board is a
shield.
shield.
Okay,
And sword is the thing you're holding.
The sword.
So
Yeah, I know what a
yes.
sword is.
I don't
Okay.
know where I get the terminology from. It might be like Skyrim or something. I don't remember. It probably goes deeper than that. Internet, let me know what the origin of sword and board is. I'd love to see that video essay on it. But yeah, it's the sword and shield fantasy, which is what is the vast majority of the time. This is what it's getting used for, because there's no reason not to hold a shield when you're using dueling. So
yeah, so you talked about the other feats, with the two-handed weapons and stuff, give you more damage. That's true. If your aim is strictly damage, that's probably the way to go. But I don't know. I could see a lot of people wanting to use a longsword and a shield. That's a good combo. And getting a little more damage on that is always fun. And
I
don't know if this was the case in editions past, but are longswords still like the most common magic weapon?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Truthfully, I know very little about the magic weapons of the system, despite DMing for years, just because I don't give them out that often, because I just forget they exist. It never crosses my mind. My rewards tend to be things that players ask for, so that's where I tend to shoehorn them. Sometimes they ask for magic items. More often they ask for like land or narrative exposition or expansions on character background stuff. Or, my warlock feels like asks I only have 2 pack magic slots. And then you give them a Rod of the Pack Keeper, because that's like a magic item built to solve a class problem, which I could go into a whole video essay on how magic items don't solve class balance, and they're kind of like a band-aid that the company actively stabbing the game is like, here, cover this wound up that we're actively causing by not fixing problems we know exist with magic items. You can play a martial character in the upper tiers and feel just as good as a caster if you have a laundry list of magic items.
All right, we'll write that down. We'll need video topics later.
Sure. More us. I find that the characters that want to do damage will very clearly and quickly find there are other builds that do more damage than this. And I ultimately think that's the nail in the coffin for actual practical uses of dueling. You need to want to play a character who uses a sword or a one-handed weapon like a scimitar or a rapier first. And then say, I want to be doing damage with that primarily over defensive options. If you're going to a character and saying, how do I do damage with this character first, you'll find 2-weapon fighting gives you bonus action attack at level 1, which is really good. And then you can add your modifier if you take the fighting style for it, so you get 2 attacks instead. Now you're trading off defense for that, you're trading off the shield, but you're doing more damage that way. You'll find that attacking with a greatsword does more damage than this, especially with great weapon fighting coming down the road. There's going to be more powerful options on the table for dealing damage in the early tiers that you're going to often be the characters that want and the players that want to have damage-based fighter builds, damage-based paladin builds, lean towards those instead, which is going to often leave this feeling like it doesn't have really a home on most character sheets. I find that's why I think of all of the characters I've seen played at the table, I see dueling as one of the least taken fighting styles, because that specific genre of fighting overlaps a lot with the protector fantasy, like I talked about before. And if that fantasy isn't doing the protector thing, then that character had to want the look for it and still be a damage dealer. And that's just a very small portion of actual cases.
All right, well, what about wants the look for it and also wants to just make the best out of what they've got to work with?
It's entirely reasonable. Plus 2 damage is big. If you ever choose that looks like plus 6 damage around and you'll have had that for all of time, that's just fine. It doesn't hurt anything. An extra going from a DA plus 3 to a DA plus 5 is big game at the early tiers. It kills a lot more things in one hit than a DA plus 3 ever could. It scales with attacks, so you do want to be attacking lots of times with it. It's probably better on rangers and fighters for that reason than paladins. Paladins kind of make 2 really big attacks, where rangers spend resources to make more attacks a lot of the time with stuff like Swift Quiver, and fighters are just good at making a lot of attacks. They get they get subclasses that give them more attacks. They just naturally get 4 extra or 3 extra attacks as they go. That's where the scaling gets obviously better. More attacks equals more damage. That is where you can probably have a fine time with it if you're in that window. I don't think it's offensive or anything to take. I think it's entirely reasonable fighting style. It's just not that common.
All right, what about I don't know if you have this information on the top of your head, but any kind of fighter subclasses that are better wielding one-handed weapons than two-handed?
So that's often going to come down to their sort of archetype that they're narrowed into. So, for example, Eldritch Knights like to have an open hand for somatic component casting. So having a one-handed weapon and somatic component casting, that's kind of reasonable. You can expect to use this more on an Eldritch Knight sometimes than that. You're making this decision before you're making your subclass decision, though. But oftentimes, your subclass decision is something you are going into the game knowing. Either you're starting at 3rd level, or you're like, this character is going to be an Eldritch Knight. I know that because that's what I want this fantasy to be. It's where I started from, and then I'll just build up to it. So you'll take the dueling ahead of time. There will be, more often than not, though, there'll be the fighter subclasses make you better at all forms of fighting for the most part. So like Samurai versus Champion versus Battlemaster, all 3 of those don't have any issue doing more or less all of the variations of fighter you could ask for. So doing the sharpshooter stuff, doing the great weapon fighting stuff, doing the sentinel stuff. Sentinel builds do like this a lot. That's notable. Sentinel builds do make attacks often. No, that's not true because they use 2-handed weapons with pokey things. I take that back. You don't have a way to attack with one-handed well with Sentinel. No one-handed weapon. I can't think of any one-handed weapons with reach. They probably don't exist. If they do exist, that's great for you. You should use it there. That seems cool. Maybe there is one. I don't know off the top of my head. Comments, let me know if there's a Sentinel build that uses a one-handed reach weapon that can work with dueling. If there is, it's great there. But for the most part, like, all of the subclasses tend to work pretty evenly well. There'll be some small niche cases where, like, oh, Battlemaster has less range support than it has melee support, but you can still play a ranged character in that build and not have any issues with it. It's really just Eldritch Knight somatic components. That kind of goes for Paladins and Rangers too. There isn't a huge deviation in allowance of builds outside of like Arcane Archer, which very obviously is this does the archery thing that you're not going to be able to make dueling work.
Yeah.
you're for the most part going to find that you can make dueling happen whatever route you go subclass wise.
All right, what about a fighter rogue multi-class?
Fighter rogues are hard, and
Yeah.
fighter rogues are hard because they're kind of juxtaposed at what they want to be doing. Rogues want to make one really big attack, and fighters like making as many attacks as possible. That being said, it doesn't seem unreasonable. Like making dueling wants you to attack twice to get 2 procs of it. It wants to attack 3 times to get 3 procs of it. Dueling will naturally scale worse the less attacks you're getting. So multiclassing with dueling is quite a bit worse than like multiclassing with 2-weapon fighting, or multiclassing with even options like interception, blind fighting, even as bland as it may be, defense is universally applicable even on options that don't care about making lots of attacks. So I would probably consider those over dueling whenever I'm going into something like a rogue, just because it's never going to scale as well if you're not getting all of those extra attacks.
Right.
If once you hit 5th level, you're probably, if you're doing the multi-attack thing and you're trying to empower that character, you want as many attacks as possible, and you're either going to get that through subclasses, through other features like multiclassing cleric for their war domains, bonus action attacks for wisdom modifier. You're going to find other ways to get those extra attacks as opposed to going to rogue for them. Rogues are fun to multiclass, but are very specific in how you have to go about it to get the most out of them.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I mean, +2 to damage with a one-handed weapon. Have we milked all that we can out of that?
I think so.
All right.
It's a reasonable option. I think if you want to, if you have to want to play the sword and board character first, you have to want to play the duelist with the rapier and deliberately hamstring yourself by not wielding a shield for some reason. And once you've done that, you can.
Whoa. You can wield a shield.
Right, but I'm saying if you want to look like the rapier duelist guy, there's no reason to not also wield a shield.
Yeah, okay.
Which is stupid to me. I wish there was a little bit more reason to have some panache and do some classic fencer stuff. There just isn't. So if you want to do those kinds of character archetypes, dueling is great for you. If you want to be a protector, I think interception and protection go on the same kind of character looks and will be often in similar build spots. So they're going to compete, but it's fine. I don't hate dueling. It's 3 out of 5. Very reasonable fighting style. Gives you more damage. Happy with it.
Yeah, middle of the road sounds about right. 3 out of 5. I will agree with that. Yep. All right, that was dueling. People, let us know what you think in the comments. Yeah, give us your opinions. You've not been shy thus far. Keep on it.
I'm here for it. Let me hear it.
All right, thank you, Sam, and thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, informative, or entertaining, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button below. You needn't smash it. A gentle tap will suffice. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel. And make sure you check out the links in the description, where you'll find my Caverns and Creatures series of comedy fantasy novels, Sam's full review of the spell, and other fun things.